and welcome to Novel Thoughts, a weekly book chat podcast hosted by me, Sapphire Bates.
And me, Joseph Dance.
Two book lovers from Ramsgate, East Kent. This is the podcast for the big readers and the book lovers. Once a month, we deep dive on one particular book, maybe an old favourite or something new and exciting, and we will read and discuss it. The rest of the time, we're spoiler-free, covering everything from new releases, old gems you might have missed, long lists, short lists, author spotlights, as well as the occasional interview. We'll also take questions from you, our lovely listeners. This week, we are deep diving. Oh yes, spoilers are incoming today. We are going to be discussing The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, and we are lucky enough to be joined by Michelle Thomas. Welcome back, Michelle. Hello, hello.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hi, Michelle. What's up?
Oh.
I'm just trying out a new thing there. Hi, how are you?
Yes,
you
don't
okay?
do that again.
You okay, sorry. It's lovely to see you.
It's lovely to see you both too.
Before we deep dive, some housekeeping to share with you. When Joseph and I began planning this podcast, we wrote a list of words that we felt represented us and what we hoped to carry through to this project. Those included anti-hustle and sustainability. We really want to get across to you lovely lot that reading is not a race. It's something that you should feel free to do at your own pace so that it remains enjoyable and not a chore. We really want to embody this ourselves too, so we've decided that every 6 weeks we'll be taking 1 week off from recording to give ourselves a week of free reading. It might not be obvious from the other side of the podcast, but we have to plan our reading schedules to ensure that we get everything read for each episode on time. This is fun, but we both agreed a week off every 6 weeks would make this much more sustainable and give us a week to breathe. We hope you'll allow yourselves this week to go slower too, whether that means not picking up a book and watching a show instead, or perhaps picking up a comfort read. Just know there's no pressure. Our podcast should be a place of inspiration for you. We don't expect anyone to read everything we mention. Instead, just pick and choose anything that stands out to you. Right, housekeeping monologue officially over. I want to know what you've both been reading this week, please.
I have been reading the new novel by Melissa Broder, Death Valley. Have you heard of this one?
Yeah, I've read it.
Okay. Well, do you want me to talk
We'll
about
still
it?
talk about it,
Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
I was just excited.
I was trying to remember how does the podcast work? Do I still need to talk about it if Saph's already read it?
No, that
Probably.
means it's old news.
Michelle, do you know about Melissa Broder?
I do not.
Okay.
Tell me about Melissa Broder.
I
will
will.
listen with open ears.
I shall. Well, I really liked her first novel, I think it was her second novel, Milk-Fed, which I don't think you liked, Saph. Did you?
No, so she did The Pisces, then Milk-Fed,
Yeah.
and then Death Valley, right?
And she wrote loads of poetry before that and did an
Yes.
essay collection and had a really infamous Twitter account called So Sad Today, which is very funny.
Oh, was that her?
She talks about depression and
Yes,
anxiety,
yeah.
but in a kind of comical...
Okay, yeah, I
crack a
think I
joke kind of
follow
way.
that Twitter account, or did follow that Twitter account. Yeah, I loved The Pisces. Didn't like Milk-Fed. It's very foodie, isn't it?
It is quite foodie. It's the story of, from memory, a young liberal Jewish woman in LA, and she strikes up. She's got like an eating disorder. She compulsively counts her calories, but she strikes up this relationship, this very sensuous, strange relationship with an Orthodox Jewish woman who works in a frozen yogurt store that she
Yes.
frequents, and then this woman starts feeding her, and it's all about mother surrogates, and there's a bit of mysticism in there, and it's all about body image and self-esteem. I kind of feel like this new novel is treading familiar ground. So I'm going to read you the synopsis first, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
So, a woman arrives alone at a Best Western hotel, seeking respite from an emptiness that plagues her. She has fled to the California high desert to escape a cloud of sorrow for both her father in the ICU and her husband, whose illness is worsening. What the motel provides, however, is not peace but a path, thanks to a receptionist who recommends a nearby hike. Out on the sun-scorched trail, the woman encounters a towering cactus whose size and shape mean it should not exist in California. Yet the cactus is there, with a gash through the side that beckons like a familiar door. So she enters it. What awaits her inside this mystical succulent sets her on a journey at once desolate and rich, hilarious and poignant. Before I go any further, I need to say that the PR person who paired the words mystical and succulent needs a pay rise. So I would say, as with all her novels, this one was very funny. I love her brand of urbane, self-deprecating Jewish humour. I really liked the lead character. She was neurotic, but she was also pragmatic, and she had a really dark way of looking at the world and her relationships, which I always appreciate. I think Broder seems to have a natural talent for writing characters that are really introspective and anxious, but she manages to do that without making them sound really whiny or annoying, which I think is kind of like a feat in itself. I can appreciate from the synopsis how the weirdness of the plot might put some people off, but I would say give it a chance. The magical cactus and the other strange plot devices that pop up are sort of symbolic, maybe.
Yeah, I think
Are you
Broder's...
vibing that?
Yeah, Broder is really good at using kind of really weird and strange storylines or aspects of the story to help represent and symbolize
Totally
big feelings and topics, I think.
Yeah.
It's always heartfelt. Even if it's a really strange book, there's a lot of emotion in there.
Yeah, completely. And I think in this book, all of those weird cacti and weird things that she finds in the desert are definitely about grief and death and reinvention. And I was going to say, because we spoke about her last week, if you like Sheila Hetty's novels, and she uses a lot of dream imagery as well, this is kind of more of the same. You'll be used to this. I just thought it was a great book, and I'd really recommend it.
Cool.
Great.
What
Thanks
else
for that
did you
vote of overwhelming enthusiasm. See you next week. My second book was a bit different, actually. I went non-fiction this week for my second pick, and I read Duty-Free Art in the Age of Planetary Civil War by Hito Steyerl. Have you heard of her? Have you heard of this?
No.
So Hito Steyerl is a German filmmaker, artist and writer, and I have to admit I haven't seen a lot of her artwork or her film work, but I have been reading her essays for quite a while. She used to, and I think she still does, publish on a website. It's like an e-journal called eFlux, and it's all about contemporary art and culture. So you can access that for free, and I'd recommend going and have a look at the essays on there. So this book was published by Verso in the UK back in 2019 and is a collection of 15 essays, many of which, having read her work before, I think deal with themes and ideas that she's kind of been preoccupied with for a long time. So she writes about the interplay between art, politics and war. For instance, how as a civilized society should we view the act of art washing? Are we all familiar with this term? Yeah, just double checking. How should we feel about global arms manufacturers like Lockheed Martin or big petrochemical giants like Esso sponsoring a museum or a gallery? And basically funding cultural production and distribution. And I think that's an ongoing conversation. Well, we're definitely having that conversation today. She talks about how the shock value of art has been reframed by the way we consume war. I guess like on our phones, in bite-sized segments, and I suppose vice versa as well, how modern art, entertainment and culture, and especially video games, distort our view of war, genocide and natural disasters as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a really interesting collection. She's kind of a futurist. She's up for trying to predict where the art world will go in the future. And there's a great essay where she talks about how museums and galleries are continually collecting data from their users so that they can provide like a hyper-tailored experience for whoever's visiting. She kind of plays on this, and she says that in the future, she thinks that galleries will use facial recognition software to scan users as they enter. I know, shudder, and only show them the works of art that fit their demographic or their character profile.
That's horrendous.
Yeah, that sounds so bad.
Well, I mean, this hasn't happened yet, but she calls this neuro-curating, which feels like something straight out of a William Gibson novel.
Yes, but it is already happening. If you think about the stuff that you get recommended by algorithms.
Yeah.
True.
They know what you like, so they just give you more of the same. And that's the whole point, is that you go to an art gallery to see things you don't expect to see.
Yeah, you want to like stumble upon things and be moved by things spontaneously. I dislike algorithms for that very reason that you've just raised, Michelle, that like I like one funny animal meme and then suddenly I'm shown hundreds and nothing else. I don't want that. I want a mixture of things. I want to be surprised and moved. And
Well, back in the day, I remember a friend didn't want to buy stuff online. I don't know why. They were just didn't want to put their card details into Amazon. So I said, I'll buy some books for you. And they were really into true crime. And so I bought some cookbooks, and then I bought these true crime novels. And for ages, my recommendations were just this weird mixture of inside Holloway and Nigella bites.
It's weird how the algorithm stalks you. I remember years ago an older relative using my laptop for a day or so, and for about 6 months afterwards I was getting little ads pop up saying, buy your perfect burial plot in Eastbourne.
I shouldn't laugh.
At least it wasn't anything kinky. That would have been awkward.
I was wondering what you were going to say.
I mean, he was planning ahead.
But he wiped the cash. It was great.
I don't think he knew what cash was in computer terms. He would have tried to have spent that in a shop. But it's a fantastic collection. I'd really recommend it.
I think that sounds really good. Michelle, what have you been reading?
Gosh, lots of things. But the two I picked to talk about very briefly, because I don't have even a clue of what year they were published in. I haven't done my research.
How informed and prepared. You spoil us, Michelle.
A Curious History of Sex is by Kate Lister, who used to run, and I think it was on Twitter, a Twitter account called Halls of Yore.
Okay.
I don't know if you've come across this.
Great title.
Yeah, then she felt bad about it because obviously we don't talk about whores anymore. We talk about sex workers. And so I think she shut it down because she felt that whore had a pejorative implication. But it's all about like prostitutes during the like Covent Garden era, and when they used to have the Victorians had the little guide to like the best prostitutes and all the things that they would do. Anyway, A Curious History of Sex is, she just talks about sex through the ages, but she talks about things like when bicycles were first introduced, the Victorians were horrified by this because they thought women would be like orgasming all over the place as they cycled around on their bikes.
I wish.
I know, I wish. I have a bike right outside. It's very disappointing.
And you've got nothing out of it.
And I don't wear bloomers or anything. Yeah, it's fun. It's funny and clever and interesting. It has a sort of broadly feminist vibe to it as well. But yeah, it's just a good fun read. And the other book that I'm dipping into, because I've been doing a Game of Thrones rewatch, which has led into a House of the Dragon rewatch, because I'm getting ready for the new season of House of the Dragon. So I've been having a look at Fire and Blood by George R.R. Martin just to get back into the world of incest and dragons.
Sounds good.
Amazing.
I've just finished Game of Thrones.
What, the book?
For
or
the first time. The TV series.
The many books.
And I haven't been able to get into the House of Dragons.
Try harder. That's all I can say.
Thank you for that. That's sterling
your
advice.
fault?
Yeah, clearly it's my fault. I'll give it another go.
I love House of the Dragon, but I'm a big Paddy Considine fan. I think he's awesome.
He's fantastic, yeah. Saph, what have you been reading?
I kind of ended up quite themed this week. So the first book that I read was The Son of Rosemary by Ira Levin.
Why? I'm just curious. Have you read Rosemary's Baby?
Yes, of course, yes.
Oh, I didn't know where that was going. That was quite confrontational, but I liked it at the same time.
I was like, should I not have?
Yeah, I would say, why, Saph?
When I saw that this is what you'd read, I was like, I didn't even know there was a sequel. And then I quickly Wikipedia'd it, and then I was like, oh.
Yes.
This is a sequel.
Yes. So obviously Ira Levin,
blown.
unless you've been under a rock for however long, wrote Rosemary's Baby. And I read Rosemary's Baby and thought it was amazing. And as I've said to you before, the only kind of classics I really read tend to be like classic horror or dystopian, because I like to see how the contemporary authors have been influenced by classic stuff. And I come across The Son of Rosemary in a charity shop, and it had it's this very similar cover to Rosemary's Baby. It was just green rather than red. And I was like looking at the back, and yes, this is the sequel to the 1967 Rosemary's Baby. Oh. And I, like Michelle, didn't even know there was a sequel. Now, I read it. It's not amazing.
Hence why I said why.
Yes, so this could be why lots of us aren't aware of the sequel, because I don't think it did as well as Rosemary's Baby. But do you know what? It wasn't bad. I enjoyed reading it. I didn't DNF. I got all the way through it. I just very much knew what was going to happen. Like, the plot wasn't necessarily very clever.
You weren't like, who's the father?
Yeah, there was no like plot twist where you're like, oh my goodness, I didn't see this coming. I put the book down and was like, well, yeah, that was as expected. But I had a good time. It is I found Rosemary's Baby I read Rosemary's Baby a really long time ago, but I remember it being quite scary, whereas The Son of Rosemary reads more like a thriller. Like, it's not particularly creepy, or, you're not kind of curled up under a duvet like, oh my goodness, covering your eyes. It is more thriller-esque, I would say. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's interesting. It's set in 1999, and it's like the turn of the millennium, and it's kind of based around that and set in New York City. time has moved forward a lot since Rosemary's Baby. And yeah, I think it's worth a go if you enjoyed Rosemary's Baby, just to see what he's done with the sequel.
I love the film. I haven't read the original book, but this sounds interesting. I'm intrigued.
I think I read the book. I can't even remember if I read the book or if I've just seen the film. I've read other books by Ira Levin, like The Boys from Brazil. I mean, he's one of these twisty writers, you know, it's always a twist.
Yeah, see, I didn't really get that with Son of Rosemary. I didn't feel like... didn't really find a twist, or perhaps the twist was just too obvious and you knew what it was going to be. But it hasn't put me off. I'm going to read more Ira. And I picked it up in a charity shop for like £2, so I'm happy with that.
Great.
Okay, and then the other book I read was Taaqtumi, an anthology of Arctic horror stories.
I've heard of this.
See, I hadn't, and I stumbled across it. It was probably on TikTok, where I tend to find lots of random books. So it's a collection of short stories by Indigenous authors. All of the stories are based in the farthest northern reaches of Earth, an area of the world that spends half of the year in perpetual darkness. So Taaqtumi translates to in the dark, which each story kind of like is very dark. It's sort of very horrifying and really captures the unique landscape. And the landscape is almost like a character of its own within these stories. I really, really, really loved this collection of stories. Really clever. A lot of the stories are built around folklore and myths. So I found it really fascinating and also scary. It's like a perfect wintry read.
Do you have a standout story that sticks with you?
There was a couple that were very dystopian, kind of zombie-esque, and they were really up my street. I don't want to say too much about them because I think you want to go into it kind of blind like I did. But I really loved those because that's right up my street of kind of scary stories. But there wasn't a story in it I didn't like.
I find zombie stories really interesting because psychologically, at their core, they're meant to be about what would happen in war or like societal breakdown. Would we help each other? And I don't know about you, but having gone through COVID, which you've all gone through as well, I kind of feel like
stop making it personal.
Yeah.
Just you.
So I went through my own personal COVID and I found that people did help me and they really like me. No, I mean, we've been through that. So we know that there is going to be some degree of cooperation. I suppose it's just tapping into that fear, isn't it? That
I mean, it's slightly different though.
what would happen if, when the shizzle hits the fan, what would actually happen?
I think the difference is that during COVID, no one was actually trying to eat your brains.
Yeah, and
I did have my uncle staying with me.
and society didn't completely collapse, whereas in a lot of these dystopian zombie stories, it's about societal collapse, and thus with no overarching kind of power or government, no kind of systems in place, every man for himself, then how do humans react? Do we still stick together or do we become...
Okay, I don't want to labour the point, but I do feel like you've just described Britain in 2024.
I think the best zombie book... did either of you read World War Z by Max Brooks?
I love that.
I feel like it's seen as quite... By people that haven't read it, any kind of zombie novel, and especially World War Z, is seen as like a bit tacky maybe or a bit cliche, but it's actually an amazing book. It's really cleverly written.
It is very good.
I think it's because of the film.
Yes, we had Brad Pitt, didn't it? Yeah, the book's amazing, and it's all written in like different people's perspectives and really clever. One of my favourite zombie books.
Great.
I'm talking of zombie things. I mean, obviously, The Last of Us was just the most amazing TV show last year, and I think in that Pedro. But in The Last of Us, obviously, there was cooperation between the zombies. They kind of worked together. I mean, they're not zombies, so they are zombies, whatever you want to call them. But they worked as one giant organism in the same way that mushrooms have a mycelium.
I thought that was really clever, and I'm obsessed with Pedro Pascal. You know, he was in Margate the other day.
Yep.
Oh God.
Doing what?
Going to an art gallery.
Just going to Morrison's.
He's really into art, and he was hanging out with Robert Diamond. I think they're friends, and
Russell Tovey.
Yeah, and that kind of crew. Oh my God, so close.
Oh,
I love him so much.
He came to Margate a couple of months back, didn't he?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Oh, I thought you said the other day.
Well, yeah, as in recently.
Oh, right, okay, sorry. I wasn't in storytelling mode. Didn't he go to a gallery to see a portrait of himself?
Yes.
But it was closed.
Potentially. I mean, I was just excited. He's so close. He's so handsome.
Okay.
He is handsome.
Very handsome. Okay, anyway, move us along because I'm going to...
Otherwise we just sit here drooling about Pedro Pascal.
Do we have any more books we want to talk about this week?
No. Shall we dive into our deep dive, guys?
Let's do it. Okay, so we're talking about the Goldfinch this week. Should we start with a synopsis?
Yes, please.
Okay. Age 13, Theo Decker, son of a devoted mother and a reckless, largely absent father, survives an accident that otherwise tears his life apart. Alone and rudderless in New York, he is taken in by the family of a wealthy friend. He is tormented by an unbearable longing for his mother, and down the years clings to the thing that most reminds him of her, a small, strangely captivating painting that ultimately draws him into the criminal underworld. As he grows up, Theo learns to glide between the drawing rooms of the rich and the dusty antique store where he works. He is alienated and in love, and his talisman, the painting, places him at the centre of a narrowing, ever more dangerous circle.
Ooh, beautifully written.
Thank you. Shall we...
Why are you saying thank you? You didn't write it. Thank
And
you.
beautifully read.
I thought Michelle said beautifully read.
I did, beautifully
I misheard.
read.
Oh, I thought you said
I'm just
beautifully written. I was
always
like,
on the lookout for compliments, so that's how my radar is tuned.
Perfect.
I'm going to tell you a little bit about Donna Tartt. I feel
Yes.
like no one needs to know anything about Donna Tartt because
one
she's
knows
really
much
well-known.
about Donna
well,
Tartt.
that's true as well. But anyway, Donna Tartt is a novelist, essayist and critic. Her debut novel, The Secret History, remains a best-selling cult dark academia novel and has been translated into over 30 languages since its initial publication in 1992. That feels like such a long time ago.
Yeah.
I wasn't even born.
When were you born,
Okay,
Saph?
now I feel old.
1994.
As I said, I'm convinced that I'd read this book in around 1988, so who knows?
Maybe you knew someone with a proof copy.
It was the black paperback, though, so I definitely didn't.
Okay. Well, we'll skip that anyway. So, her second novel, The Little Friend, her second
Gossip novel.
It's like the Babysitters Club. Her second novel, The Little Friend, a Southern Gothic, which echoes Tartt's own childhood experiences of growing up in Mississippi, was published a decade later in 2002 and went on to win the W.H. Smith Literary Award. Are they still around, W.H. Smith?
Just.
Probably, yeah, but they're not giving out awards anymore.
No.
And was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, which I think back in the day was called the Orange Prize or something like that. Her third novel, The Goldfinch, which we're talking about today, was published in October 2013. It was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and the Andrew Carnegie Award for Excellence in Fiction in 2014. It was also shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction and was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. In Europe, the novel was awarded Italy's Malaparte Prize in 2014 for Best Novel by an International Writer. Now, I can't really ask, had you heard of Donna Tartt before picking up The Goldfinch, as you would have had to have been in a decades-long coma to have escaped all the hype about her work and her as an author. She is the reclusive literary genius of our times, much like J.D. Salinger and Thomas Pynchon were before her.
She's also got not much of a work ethic, in my opinion.
One novel every 10 years, but they're really good. I mean, she published The Secret History when she was 29, just 29, putting her on the map as one of America's greatest fiction writers. So she really did solidify her reputation with her debut, which is impressive, I think. She's also got one of the, and Michelle, you've just referenced this, one of the most famous publication schedules in history, producing a novel pretty much every decade, which means we're actually due for one soon.
Yeah, there are lots of rumours, aren't there, that there's another one coming. She's actually hinted that there's another one coming, but no publisher is there's nothing actually that I can, like as a bookshop owner, normally if something's going to be out 2024, I would already, even if I couldn't see the cover or anything about it, it would already have a little side note that we'd know that there was a book coming from Donna Tartt, and currently there isn't anything.
Nothing.
So I don't know.
Nothing on the computer. She hasn't sent a text message.
No, I mean, we're pretty close.
She's stopped
raven.
answering your calls. So it's kind of timely that we're discussing The Goldfinch then, given that there might be a new Donna Tartt out this year.
Yeah.
So, initial thoughts. Have you read her work before, and what did you think of The Goldfinch?
You looking at me?
I'm looking at you, Robert De Niro.
Yes, as I said, I've read The Secret History. I am still absolutely convinced I read this at university, but I can't have done because it wasn't published when I was at university. So, but I do remember we all read it. It was one of those books that was passed around and was just like, have you read The Secret History? And then I bought The Little Friend in hardback. So it's still sitting like the Bible in a shelf in my house untouched because it's massive.
It is a big book.
And I just find hardbacks, they're just too big. You can't carry them around. They're too
See, I love
awkward.
a hardback.
I like them, but they're too big. And it's one of those ones where I'm like, at some point I'll go back and I will read it. What did I think of the Goldfinch? I have a lot to say about this. I think it's a big book. So maybe
What are your headline feelings?
My headline feeling is that I think it's a dive right in and yomp book. I read 200 pages just in one go.
Wow, you were yomped.
Yes. And I think it is that kind of book where it's a very plot-driven, good story that just captures your attention straight away. So that was my initial feeling. I do have other things to say about it, but I think I'll hold back on those.
Hold fire for the moment. Saph, initial thoughts?
Well, I was actually thinking when you were talking about Donna Tartt, like I actually only heard of Donna Tartt a couple of years ago. So
What?
yeah, but
Who even are you?
I don't,
We love you. We respect you.
I don't know.
You have a place at this table.
I just didn't know. I'd heard people talk about The Secret History, and I eventually was like, okay, I'm going to read it, and I loved it. I thought it was amazing. I've also got The Little Friend upstairs, and I started it and just couldn't get into it. But us doing this deep dive has made me think, right, I actually need to go back to The Little Friend and commit to it. Yeah, so I'm quite a newbie Donna Tartt fan, really. Goldfinch for me, like initial summation, a really good book.
A really good book. Ding, 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 ding.
I liked it. That's what I have to say.
Good.
Initially.
Well, that's a positive start. I'm going to save my thoughts for our discussion, but can we start by talking about the structure and the genre of the book, if that's not too heavy?
No, let's do it.
So I've got two quotes here because I kind of feel like they sum up some of my thoughts. So writing in the New York Times, the legendary critic Michiko Kakutani said, Mrs. Tartt, Miss Tartt, sorry, just marrying her off there.
Lady Tartt.
Lady Tartt has written a gloriously Dickensian novel, a novel that pulls together all her remarkable storytelling talents into a rapturous symphonic whole and reminds the reader of the immersive stay-up-all-night pleasures of reading. And then another critic at the time of publication said, it's a crime novel, an art history thesis, an LGBTQ coming-of-age story, and a meditation on toxic masculinity, all wrapped up in 976 pages. So it's a big novel. There's clearly space for it to be a lot of different things. Do you think it worked? Do you think it was all those different things?
No, well, yes, but I don't know about an LGBTQ coming of age story. I feel very similar to like our discussion with A Little Life, where that was quoted as being, I can't remember what the quote was, but they said it was a gay cult novel kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, and we didn't really feel that. And I didn't really feel that with this. Of course, there is that slight relationship, which I won't go into too much, relationship/friendship between two of the characters, which I think we'll come on to.
They were roommates.
Yes. But I mean, I didn't really feel there wasn't that much queerness going on, I didn't think.
Should we just name that relationship now?
Yes.
Boris and Theo.
Yeah.
My feeling about Boris and Theo was more that they were horny boys, not necessarily that they were gay.
Yeah, just that they didn't really have a lot of people around them. They were in that dusty, kind of desolate part of Las Vegas, like a housing estate. There was only those two. They didn't have a lot of choice.
They were raunchy adolescents in a sex desert.
And I know boys who went to boarding school who are definitely not gay now, but while they were at boarding school and isolated, they fooled around because there was no one else to fool around with.
So we don't think it's an LGBTQ coming of age novel.
I
Just
think
like
it
we
might
didn't
be
think.
a coming of age novel.
Yeah.
But not an LGBTQ plus one.
Okay. What did you think of the idea that it's a crime novel? Because I certainly thought the latter half of the book styled itself as a bit of a thriller.
I found the second half of the book less successful. It had less of that absolute immersive quality than the beginning. I didn't enjoy it as much.
I really agree with you there. It felt like a separate novel to me almost, the latter part of the book. I was so caught up from the very beginning in Theo and what was going on for him. I still stuck around when we skipped to and it had been 8 years and he was back in New York City and he was more grown up. And yeah, I was still really into it then. But by that very latter part, don't want to say I lost the will to live a little bit, but I did feel like it felt a bit more cliche.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I think it was, for me, the plot was too fast paced. And I think we lost a lot of the richness of the character description that had been the novel up to that point.
Yeah, and it didn't really feel like it had to be fast paced because it's an 800 and something page book. Like she had enough room in that book to
Plus, I mean, I think we are going to talk about addiction later, but I did just get to the point where it's like another description of Theo on drugs or drunk. We know he's taking drugs. We know he's drinking. Could we maybe do something else?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with the end of the book, it's quite philosophical, isn't it? We're skipping to the end now, but we leave him and he's quite lonely and he doesn't really know what life is going to hold for him. And that felt a little bit weird to kind of snap back into that philosophical mode of storytelling after we'd had the kind of heist in Amsterdam.
Yeah, because you lost it and then it suddenly, for the very last few pages, went back to it and it felt, I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
I wrote in my notes, I did not like Theo's final monologue, which was the opposite of show, don't tell. The novel's thesis is clear without Theo needing to explain it.
Michelle, Thomas, you've passed your Viva. Congratulations.
Now, I did have a question. Seeing as we're just discussing this end bit, I might as well ask this now. When I read that very last bit by Theo, was he like saying some of it didn't actually happen? Because I was a bit confused by some of the language in that very last part where he said, and this is how I've decided to tell this story. And it kind of hinted that perhaps he'd embellished parts of it, or because it was from his journal, right? So he's saying, yes, and I...
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was Donna Tartt commenting on how unreliable all storytelling is, how we do embellish with our own emotions, how we shorten things or extend things depending on how we feel and how we want to portray ourselves when we're looking back on our memories.
Because I finished this book in the bath and I was like, I read it quite a few times thinking she's not done that annoying cliche thing. Like they do it in TV quite a lot.
Like
and
Dallas.
It was all a dream.
Yeah.
No, I
He was in the shower all the time.
Yeah, and you think...
None of it ever happened. And actually, Theo's going to wake up in that museum.
Yeah, he was just on a really long trip.
He's in a coma.
Yeah, I felt, I was a bit like, I've given this book hours and hours, and now I'm a bit confused by that very last kind of monologue.
I think it was talking about all that survives of us is art kind of thing. But I didn't feel that she needed to say it. I just felt it was a bit like, you've read all this, but here I'm just going to, in case you're a bit stupid and not paying attention, I'm actually going to tell you what I mean, which I didn't think was necessary.
I mean, I appreciate that.
A bit like at the end of an assignment or an essay where you have to conclude and wrap up, and you're like, let me summarize.
Don't you feel like the ending kind of, it fitted with the general vibe of the whole book, which was, it felt a bit sliding doors at times, like his life could have gone one of two directions at any point. And the ending is kind of like, well, uncertainty, chance has all played a part in my life. And this is the story I'm going to tell. I'm going to be the editor now. This is how I'm going to fashion the narrative.
Yes, I just think it's an incredible book, and that just felt like Donna was clever enough to not need that.
Yeah.
Donna, you're better than this.
You are. Come on.
Donna, see me.
see me, Lady Tartt. Should we talk about the characters?
Yes.
I mean, the novel is told exclusively from Theo's perspective, so it probably makes sense to think about the various characters in the novel in terms of his relationship with them. But should we talk about Theo himself first? Was he likeable? Does he need to be likeable? Did you always agree with his actions and his reasons for doing what he did? Michelle?
I don't think anyone needs to be likeable. I think Theo's obviously damaged. I mean, he's lost his mother. His dad's a wanker. He doesn't really have anyone else in his life.
Poor Larry.
Well, he was a wanker.
Okay, all right.
And and even his friends, apart from Andy, he doesn't really have any other friends. His ex-friend just stops talking to him. And then he has Boris, and that's kind of it, really, until he moves back to New York. I think the Las Vegas years are pretty grim. As a mother of a 13-year-old, I was slightly horrified that this is what my boy might be getting up to in the next few years. I can keep him locked in his bedroom.
What? International art heist?
International art heist, drug taking, alcohol abuse, generally just, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think a part of that came around because he didn't have
completely
the right,
neglected.
he didn't have the right
Yeah.
parental figures.
Yeah.
He didn't have any attention and love from family or friends. Like it was just him and Boris, and they had nothing to do there.
Yeah.
No, 100%.
I liked Theo. I didn't necessarily agree with everything he did, but I think he came across very human, very complex, and Donna built the character really well in that you could see why he did what he did. I felt like I understood Theo, and I could almost felt as though I could understand his reasoning and how the decisions that he made. I'm like, well, I can see how you got there. I might not do that myself, but...
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw child Theo as a survivor, and then adult Theo, some questionable decision-making. But even in his relationships with Pippa and Kitsy, which were fairly dysfunctional, I still thought he was quite honourable.
Yeah, I didn't think he was a particular...
He wasn't a player.
No, I didn't think he was a particular bad character. Like, I don't think... obviously, he does end up killing people in our latter bit, which we've said the spoilers, so that's fine. That's not great.
That's not great, kids.
I don't think you're meant to do that. But aside from, like, that, I don't think he did anything that awful. He obviously was struggling with addiction. He wasn't treating people always the best or making the best decisions. But yeah, I didn't think he was like
The
awful.
one person I think he treated badly was Hobie.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
Say more.
How come?
Well, because Hobie took him in, gave him a home, gave him a job. And I know he thought he was helping with his little crime spree, selling fake antiques. He, when he gets caught, he's been doing this for years and he's gotten away with it. And Hobie, I know, didn't ask any questions and he saved his business, but then it kind of spiraled out of control.
That was quite heartbreaking, actually.
Yeah.
Now, thinking back on it, the moment in the novel where Theo knows he's been busted by Lucius Reeve and he can't buy back the forged furniture, and it puts everything at risk that he's built and that Hobie's built. And he finally tells Hobie, or Hobie works it out, I can't quite remember.
He tells
He tells him.
He tells him because he's desperate. I mean, he's at that point where he's crying over the check that he can't force on this horrible man.
Yeah. And Hobie's response is so muted and tight-lipped, but you can see that he's so disappointed in Theo.
He is, but he does also say within that scene that he did kind of turn a blind eye. Like, I'm not...
Yeah.
I don't think
He
what
did
Theo
say to
did was
yeah.
right, but equally, at no point did Hobie think, wow, how has he made this much money?
But I don't think Hobie even looked at the money. I think Hobie was so non-businessy.
Yeah, but if you're business partners, ultimately,
but I think
you have a responsibility. You're both signing on those like they don't have like the same self-assessments and tax returns as we do, but you're signing off on those tax returns and those bills. And if you go into something together as business partners, you've got a responsibility to find out what the other is doing.
I know what you mean, but I guess I feel it was like because Hobie didn't have to, and he basically adopted Theo when he came back to New York, and he gave him a home and he gave him all this stuff, and it was just like, oh, I just wish Theo had slowed his roll with his criminal enterprises. I just think he just wasn't thinking, and it was very like a kick in the teeth to Hobie that he'd done that.
Yeah, I think it was. I don't think it was great to Hobie. But I don't know. When he was doing it, I didn't think it was that bad.
I just really liked Hobie.
It was
Poor
like
Hobie.
I did. I really liked Hobie. I thought he was lovely and one of my favourite characters in the book. But equally, I mean, I kind of felt like the people that Theo was ripping off were, I don't really like those people anyway. Like very wealthy people who, are all about status.
Probably wouldn't miss a couple of $1,000.
Yeah, so I just kind of thought, well,
It wasn't something. He was selling something for like $70,000. It wasn't.
yeah,
like
but these people are willing to spend $70,000 on like art and these. Yeah, I don't know that I agree with all that anyway. So I was just like, yeah, go for it, Theo.
But I mean, it was quite an advanced scheme. He was then buying stuff back so that it could be certificated, so it could have like an
But he was
audit trail.
only doing that when he had to.
when they
When they were
quibbled.
questioning
Yeah, if
it.
anyone questioned it, his way out was to buy it back, and then that could legitimize it for him to sell it again. But he wasn't doing that with all of them. He only did that on the people that raised questions.
I think something I just wanted to pick up on what you just said about that you didn't like those people and it's almost like they deserve what they got. And that's one of the things that I don't like particularly about this book. It's like she has this moral compass, and there are certain people who are good people, and it's all tied up in notions of taste, and it's quite snobbish.
Yeah, and to be fair, as you said that back to me, it made me really hear what I'd actually said, and that is quite a mean thing to say. But I'm stereotyping a whole group of people based on their earnings.
But I think Donna Tartt's doing that because it's like Theo's mother is basically a sort of angel. So she's interested in art and culture, but not in a grasping or selfish way. So that's good taste. And then Mrs. Andy's mother's name, I can't think of.
Mrs. Barber.
Mrs. Barber. She's like one of the few characters in the book who's really got shades of grey because she has good taste, but she's also cold and not very emotional. Most of the other people kind of seem to fall into one or other.
That's interesting, though, because that's true, actually. But I thought that Theo's mum, I thought we saw her like that because we're seeing it through the eyes of a child, because that's how Theo remembers his mum, and he only knew her as a child. So he's got quite a childlike view of his mum being angelic and being just an all-round, good person because he loved her so much. That's what I was thinking.
But then you get that also from like the lawyers, sort of like, oh, and she was so amazing, and she was this and she was that. And it's like,
I thought he was just like a bit of a leechy man.
He was.
That fancied her.
Possibly.
Mr. Bracegirdle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pause for that name. I liked Audrey. There was definitely a degree of making her out to be a bit of a saint. But I agree with you, Saph. That was young Theo remembering his mother, who he missed very, very much. I thought it was quite interesting that Audrey had lost her parents when she was young and had gone to live with her evil aunt Bess.
And Pippa?
And Pippa had lost her parents and then was being dealt with by her aunt. So there's kind of a lot of absent parents in this novel. They're either dead or they choose to be absent. Dickensian. It is very Dickensian in that sense. It's very David Copperfield.
Why? Because I've not read any Charles Dickens. So
most of the characters in Dickens are orphans.
Right, okay. Just for anyone else listening like me who's like, I haven't actually read Charles
No, it was
Dickens,
good. It was good to have that explanation. And I was thinking about Theo's father, Larry. What did we think of Larry?
You don't really get to know Larry that well.
Really?
Well, not really. I mean, he's hardly ever there. He's obviously just like as dodgy as, and then he beats Theo up and then he dies.
That's true. And asks him to take money from his trust fund.
Yeah, and then obviously when he can't get the money, he dies.
I
wonder whether he did it on purpose.
Ooh.
I thought Larry was just really troubled and lacking self-awareness. So just no awareness of how all of his behaviour is affecting his child. His like constantly making mistakes and tripping. He'd owe money. He'd be in a bad relationship. His addiction was bad. Whatever. What quick fix is there to make this better without ever thinking, how is this affecting my wife? How is this affecting my girlfriend? How is this affecting my child?
I was just going to say, plus obviously I'm an alcoholic, so I'll drink less, but I'll just switch to another form of self-medication.
You're talking about Larry?
Yes.
Okay. Not yourself.
Not me. That's another conversation.
That is another podcast again. I mean, Larry's obviously a damaged individual. He's very dysfunctional. What really touched me, though, was Theo trying to keep the love between him and Larry alive. And there was one moment where I found myself tearing up in the book. And it was when Theo later on talks to Bracegirdle and says, I couldn't have got that money from my trust fund, could I, when my dad asked? And Bracegirdle says, yes, you could have. I could have given it to you. I just didn't really like the sound of him. He sounded like a rogue. And there's that moment where it's not said, but you can kind of feel all these thoughts rushing through Theo's mind. If only I'd got that money, my dad might not have died in that car crash. Well, and for me, I just thought that was absolutely devastating.
Well, the thing is, poor Theo, I mean, no one's ever really explicitly said to him, this isn't your fault. I think he carries a lot of guilt, a lot of it unsaid, but he's moving through the world, losing the people around him. And he hasn't really got any kind of wiser, older people around him to be like, look, you couldn't have changed these things. Like this was nothing to do with your behavior. And it's totally normal when you face trauma to you know, if you lose a parent or things like that, to think it's my fault. Children often do think, oh, this must be because of me. And if that's never corrected, you'll grow up thinking that.
But part of what was frustrating is that there's this attempt to give him all this support, but all the people who are trying to give him the support all seem to be completely useless. I mean, the various counsellors and therapists and people that he sees, the ones that assigned him by the school and stuff, they're just awful.
Well, I think it's too late by that point, isn't it? I think he's already been through so much. And
no, but that's when he just immediately afterwards, when he goes to live at Andy's house, he's in school in New York.
Okay.
There's the social workers, there's teachers at school who try and comfort him with their own stories of grief, which don't land well at all. There's the grandparents that don't want anything to do with him. Oh, I think they sent him a bus ticket.
Only after quite a long time.
Yeah.
Well, they sent a card.
Sort of a card,
but
a
not
postcard
signed by
or
the
something
granddad.
like,
Yeah.
terribly sorry your mum died.
And then I guess there's Larry, who we've just discussed, Zauner, his wife, partner, who's pretty useless, Mr. Barber, who is having like moments,
He's got his own
moments. He's got his own stuff going
problems.
on. Boris's father, it's really only Hobie who's the responsible adult in the room. So he is pretty much alone. What about some other characters? I might be a bit controversial and say I really didn't like Pippa or Kitsy. I thought Pippa was really anodyne and boring and just kind of a bit listless.
I thought Pippa was like a romantic pixie dream girl, whatever that saying is.
That's funny because we were just talking about this last week. Manic pixie dream
That's
girl.
it.
Okay.
Except not manic, just pixie dream girl. She's just like the thing that Theo glommed onto and has never
That's
never
how I thought
stopped
of
thinking
it.
about. But they don't really have any kind of genuine relationship, really.
Yeah, he meets her in a chapter called Morphine Lollipop. And when he kisses her, it numbs all the pain.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what she's there for.
Yeah, and she's obviously very tightly wrapped up in his first trauma at the museum. I think it's more what she represents for him. I don't think he's clear in his own head. I think he thinks that he loves her, but they don't really have a relationship of any kind. Nearer the end, as they get older, they're a bit closer because they've had these years of her visits and the dinners with Hobie and what have you. But ultimately, to me, it was like, I think it's more just a trauma bond. They've both been through the same thing. She's still alive. She survived too. And to Theo, that means
And she actually had
love.
like physical damage in a way that he didn't. So maybe seeing someone who's even more damaged than him in a way is a consolation.
Yeah. I mean, that last section where they meet up and she says, oh, we're both damaged goods. We can't be together for that reason. It didn't really land for me because as you've just been saying, it felt like a very chaste, nothing-y relationship. So it didn't really feel like the culmination of this big Tristan and Isolde moment.
To me, it was like, you can't be together because you've never really had that many conversations. You don't know what you both, apart from the odd bit of music, like you've not spent enough time together.
You love bombed each other.
Yeah, like you there's nothing really there, like to build a relationship.
Well, apart from the very expensive necklace,
which she didn't accept anyway, and he left in a shoe outside a room or something, didn't he?
That's romantic.
Well, Hobie was not at all happy about that either. He was like, "Stop it! What are you doing?"
Yeah, don't make a fool of yourself. Kitsy, I just couldn't get over how much of a brat she was in the early stages of the book. I just didn't buy that she'd grown into this beautiful socialite that he was having a relationship. It just didn't seem to stick.
Because she wasn't really having a relationship with him.
No, she was in love with Tom Cable, wasn't she?
Yeah.
She was literally, ultimately, I thought she was only with Theo to make her mum happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to do what would make everyone, this was
her
socially
brother,
acceptable.
Like Platt would be happy.
Yeah.
He was a good enough figure in the ways that Tom Cable wasn't for her to take out with her friends and all that kind of thing. But yeah, ultimately she didn't like him at all. I could see that she'd grown into someone beautiful. That I thought was believable because Mrs. Barber is sold as, although very icy, a well put together and beautiful woman. But yeah, character-wise, I just thought she was a bit of a bitch.
She's like an Upper East Side wasp character, isn't she?
Yeah, just I don't. The whole idea, like it's said a couple of times that she doesn't like any serious conversation. It's like, well, why are you then with a man like Theo, who has been through so much trauma and clearly has a lot of emotions? He's an addict.
He was drunk.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but like that was all obvious. Why would you choose that person who clearly is going to have those moments where serious conversations are going to be need to had, and you can't have them. You just giggle.
I suppose she's got that kind of lifelong relationship with him from childhood.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean she needs to go out with him.
Maybe it's another trauma bond. Her family took him in when he was at his greatest need. And I mean, she does say at some point that she kind of felt guilty about the way that she treated him when she was younger. So maybe it's kind of a pity relationship, or I don't know, a mix of those things.
I think a lot of it is to do with the mother, though, because basically she's turned into Miss Havisham in her bedroom all alone. And Kitsy's a Stella, and Theo is Pip. And they are being pushed together by their families.
More Dickensian tropes.
Yeah, sorry. If you don't know what I'm talking about, great expectations.
Okay.
Wikipedia.
Got it.
Wikipedia. Can we talk about Tom Cable? I think he's one of my favourite characters in the novel. He's only in it for a couple of lines.
Yeah, there's not much to him.
He smokes behind the bike sheds.
He has a huge impact on the course of the novel. He is the guy that gets Theo into smoking behind the bike sheds and breaking into homes in the East Hamptons so that he gets excluded from school, so that they go to the Met, so that they're there when the terrorist bomb goes off.
It's the inciting incident.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when that moment when Theo's wandering the streets looking for Kitsy, oh no, he's not looking for her, is he? He's just kind of wandering, he's moping around. And then he sees Kitsy kissing Tom Cable. And it's almost like Tom is the version of that Theo could have been of himself if his mother hadn't died.
Do you think, though, because Cable is explained by everybody else as a bit of an arsehole,
Yeah.
so would he want to be Cable? Would that who we'd want him to be if he didn't have...
Cable's really true to himself. He does whatever he wants. Remember when
I don't know that we know enough about Cable to know he's true to himself, do we?
Well,
I don't know.
When Audrey dies and Theo goes back to school, he gets attention from his friends and his teachers and the social workers, but Cable completely ignores him to the point where Theo fantasizes about punching him in the face.
But that was horrible. That was so mean.
Well, they went from being friends to being, he basically ghosts him.
Yeah, because I don't think he wanted to be associated with someone that was sad and that people were kind of like tiptoeing around.
Yeah, and I'm not advocating that kind of behaviour or response. I think, support your friends if they've been in a terrorist attack, obviously. But I just thought he was 100% himself. And I think Kitsy saw that in him as well. And that's why she chose him, because she had the choice between a damaged, dysfunctional Theo or someone who had just lived his life how he wanted to.
I don't know.
Am I writing a new version of the Goldfinch here?
I was just going to
Oh
say
my
that
God.
they probably...
Tom Cable fan fiction. Who would he
Tom
have
and
sex with?
Kitsy.
Well, Kitsy, yeah. Obviously.
But I was going to say is probably that because they live that life, they're all there on the Upper East Side. So they're probably going to the same parties and going to the same summer camps. And so Kitsy and Tom would have just been in each other's orbit that whole time, whereas Theo wasn't. He comes back into their orbit. So in a weird way, I mean, are these Kitsy's only two choices? Are there other men in New York? She doesn't have to pick between the two of them.
This is true.
My thoughts, I didn't necessarily get that while reading the novel. Like, I didn't feel at any point that Tom was being true to himself. I thought he maybe is true to himself, but I just thought it was selfish. All of his actions throughout the entire book aren't very nice. Like, they might be what he wants, but it's massively not nice to anybody else, in the sense that he could have told the teachers it was him smoking and not Theo, and instead he doesn't. He lets Theo be drawn into it, and thus Theo has a meeting at school because he speaks to Tom, and Tom's just like, don't say anything, like, doesn't back his friend, then doesn't talk to him and ghosts him, which is really nasty, just so his own popularity isn't affected. Then he's with Kitsy and knows that Kitsy is with Theo, and still is like, don't give a fuck, I'm going to still keep seeing... Not that nice to Kitsy, which is why Platt doesn't even want Kitsy with him. He's like, he's a womanizer, he's like, he's not great, he's been doing all this dodgy stuff. Like, just thought he was an arsehole. And I think Kitsy was attracted to him because women always are
Attracted to the bad boy.
boys. It's more exciting. Theo isn't exciting.
Okay.
Well, Theo's a criminal with a drug addiction.
But nobody
He's
really
quite
knows
exciting.
that.
But he's just not selling it, is he, really?
No, he's not. He's
It's
not
not part
like,
of his brand.
It's just it's like a chemical thing. Like if a man is like, or a woman, whoever is like hot and then cold, you are more attracted to them because it's that excitement and
Until
you're
you have
chasing the
therapy.
high. Yeah, until you gain self-awareness and reflection and stuff. But Kitsy of course would. I'm sure that's why Tom got lots of women.
Also, I can imagine because her family don't like him. There's always that element as well.
That helps, yeah.
So she's rebelling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Still very much that young bratty girl, but just playing it differently.
Are there any other characters we want to think about?
We should talk about Boris, really, shouldn't we?
We should talk about Boris.
Potter.
That was the name that Boris gave Theo because he wore Harry Potter-style glasses.
Which he still apparently wears into his late 20s or
they're
however old he
getting
is by
bigger
the
and
end.
bigger and more expensive. Okay, Saph, what did you think about Boris?
Interesting. He made me laugh, a lot of his lines in the book, especially when they're younger and like that Las Vegas time. He's quite funny, even if he is not a great influence on Theo, and probably Theo on Boris too. I quite liked him. I didn't. By the time we find out that he stole the painting, I mean, when I found that out, I had no idea. And to be fair, I thought that was really impactful because perhaps just because I'm quite anxious, that all that scene in kind of the middle part where Theo takes what he thinks is the painting and puts it in storage, and he's paying 2 years in advance, and all those times he's worrying about it. I had so much anxiety for that because I'm quite an anxious person anyway. I have general anxiety disorder, so I'm anxious about everything all of the time. And I could really I spent a lot of time thinking, oh my goodness, the amount of anxiety I would feel about this painting and not knowing how to deal with it. And then I just laughed so much when it turned out that Boris had actually taken it and he had been so anxious for so long about the painting and the painting hadn't even been there. But obviously, anyway, I'm on a tangent there.
No, I thought that was one of the big plot reveals in the whole book.
Well, it was. And then you think it did change my view of Boris.
But also, I loved the way that Boris was like, what? You didn't check? I mean, that's who Boris is. He would have opened it and gone, oh, where's my painting?
I thought Boris was true to himself. Like the fact he stole the painting, I was like, well, what can you expect? That follows, it tracks with what we've seen of him so far. And even his version of fixing things, right? By actually just drawing Theo. The only thing I found frustrating in the book was that part of the book. To me, I was like, well, problem solved, Theo. You don't have the painting anymore. Just let the painting be lost. Problem over. The anxiety of someone finding that you've got it, that it would affect Hobie, that's been dealt with for you because you don't have it.
But they didn't believe him.
Who didn't?
What's his name called? That man?
Oh, Lucius.
Lucius Reed, who has 5 other names.
Yeah.
Yes, but I mean, ultimately, let Lucius come and search everything. Be like, come, find it. Go, he didn't have it, so it wouldn't be found.
He didn't physically have it, but emotionally, the painting of the Goldfinch was more complicated than that for him, wasn't it, Theo?
Well,
because the
yes.
painting was a link to his dead mother.
That part I was a bit frustrated because I felt he did a bit of a 180 there. I felt that for the first half of the book, he's like, the painting, although he did love the painting, everything was like, I should really get rid of this painting. I'm going to do that at some point. All this anxiety about the fact he's got it. Then he gets what he wants, what he says he wants, which is that the painting just disappears and is no longer his problem, sort of, in the sense that Boris has taken it. And then all of a sudden it's like, I need the painting back. Oh my God, I've lost the painting. And it's like, well,
do you know,
you can't have it both ways.
I read that in my Cliff Notes. I read that it was a kind of a bit of symbolism for the grief that Theo was experiencing for his mother. And they do say that grief comes in waves. And sometimes when you think that the really bad grief has gone away, it actually comes back years later. So I think he had mixed feelings about the painting. He wanted to get rid of it. He wanted to stop grieving his mother and perhaps start remembering her more positively. But then when it was gone, he felt that loss really acutely.
Yeah, I just felt I think that was, I think you're right. But to me, I was just like, that's fine to be really torn up and realise that now that it's gone, that's brought up a lot for you. Doesn't mean you need to go to Amsterdam with Boris with no idea what's really going on and get yourself into a load of crap like that. That could have been
otherwise, he
avoided.
wouldn't have had the exciting last third.
But we didn't need the exciting last third.
Yeah, we've already said that. Lady Tartt could have cut the last third of this novel.
Yeah, really.
I just want to say about Boris, I liked him. He wasn't an idealist. He put his life together from the fragments that he found around him. If he didn't like his alcoholic father, he latched onto Larry and Zauner. And I thought he was a really quite moving, affectionate character who gave Theo that kind of necessary emotional support that was lacking from so many of the other characters, even if they were there and supposed to be supporting him, like Kitsy. He was a bit icy and distant. So I think Boris worked, and he was a completely believable character as well, quite lovable.
Yes, yeah.
Also, I think Theo's Vegas sojourn would have been absolutely desperate if he hadn't had Boris.
If he was just there on his Game Boy,
that would
taking
have
opioids.
been horrendous.
It would have, but equally, I still think that would have been better for him because I don't know that he would have got into drugs in the way that he
might
did.
have starved to death, though.
He might have, or he might have studied and worked really hard and realised that was his ticket out, was through kind of like education and things like, rather than drugs and alcohol.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know.
I'm going to move us on. I just want us to have a think about any key themes that really stuck out in the book. So we've talked about loss, innocence and experience. We've talked about trauma bonds, trauma relationships. Michelle, you talked about addiction. Did you feel like that was a big part of the book?
Yes. I mean, there's one of those things, really, isn't it? Because obviously, when you talk about generational trauma, obviously Theo's father is an addict. Theo becomes an addict. Why I can't remember anyone's names today. Andy's father, Mr. Barber.
Yes.
Has mental health issues and was medicating. So there's a lot of people medicating, whether it's self-medicating or being given drugs by their doctors. So there's some serious, and Boris, obviously, there's a lot about addiction and drugs in this book. And I think the addiction side, yes, the sort of descriptions of people on drugs can get a bit overdone. But I agree. I think it's of its time in a weird way.
Yeah, I think it can. And to me, I guess it's almost a reflection, or I felt as though it was meant to be a reflection of what it's like to be an addict in that sense, and that it is just this constant, your life becomes getting the drugs, feeling ill because you're not on the drugs, periods of trying not to. It is this little cycle that goes on, and it is repetitive. And I think it feels repetitive even to the addict.
Yeah. And it's not a theme, but you talking about reminders and kind of repetition. I thought that was a really nice part of the book, that there's a lot of mirroring and pairs, it seems, in the book. So the painter of the Goldfinch, Carl Fabricius, he died, I think, in the year that he painted the Goldfinch from an explosion at a gunpowder factory in Delft, where he lived in the Netherlands. And that kind of mirrors Audrey's death at the Met. And then there's the painting of the Goldfinch itself, it's kind of chained up, isn't it? It's on its like little...
It's on a perch.
Yeah, and then you get Theo chained to the painting because it represents something about his mother. And it's also his kind of like ties to the underworld. And we already talked about Audrey losing her parents, but then lots of other people lose their parents. It seems to be a kind of a ripple going through the narrative.
I mean, one of the things about being orphaned, it's a classic trope from children's fiction, which I think has come from the Victorian fiction. So in Edwardian fiction, often they're dead parents or they're sick parents or they're sent away. The children are sent away so they can have adventures. And this is because if you've got loving, responsible parents, when Theo's mother died, if his dad swooped in, got him to therapy, got him into a great school and did everything, then you've got no novel. So it's only the fact of those absentee, useless adults that actually enables the book to take place.
Yeah, because if his dad had not fled and his dad had not had his addiction and he'd had a loving relationship with both his mum and his dad, the loss might not have been so profound.
Well, exactly. And he would have had support and he would have had a stable home life with 3 meals a day.
Perhaps, the people in school that spoke to him and the therapist that he saw, they all might have had a chance of getting in. I just wanted to say, while we talk of themes, like this was the kind of book that I was kind of, and I don't know if it's perhaps because I didn't do English literature, so my brain might think about books in a slightly different way, but I was just very lost in the story. Yes. It wasn't until we were doing our notes for this that I saw all of Joseph's list of themes and thought, oh yeah, like those things were going on in the book. I was kind of just lost in the story and was just kind of like page turning, like what's going to happen, what is going on here. I really wasn't thinking too much, like nothing was really popping up for me in terms of themes until I was kind of...
Yeah.
I think to me, that is the strength of this novel. And it's interesting because obviously it was very much acclaimed and loved, but it was a bit of a Marmite book because there was I read a Vanity Fair article, which is all about, somebody described this as the death of literary fiction.
Oh, that's harsh.
It got some very harsh criticism because it was like it's a page turner, but when you finish it, it's empty. There's nothing there.
That's really interesting because it got a lot of critical acclaim in America when it was published, but it was absolutely ripped into by the British press. The European press loved it, but the British press said it was a children's book or a young adult book.
Harry Potter.
Yeah.
They literally did.
But written for adults.
How could, I could...
Because it's a bit and then and it's
like a chronicle almost.
It doesn't go deep.
Okay, so we've spoken about strengths and weaknesses. What rating would you give the book, Michelle?
3.5.
Saph?
4.2. It would have been higher, but it's too long. That last bit brought it down for me. But I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed it.
I am going to say a 4. I really enjoyed this book.
I mostly enjoyed it.
Good.
Okay. Shall we move on? I think we might have reached that part of the show where we try to help one of our listeners find their next must-read book. Are we ready, guys?
We are.
Hi, Novel Thoughts. Loving the new podcast. I was hoping you guys could give me some recommendations for autobiographies. I realise that when autobiographies are bad, they can be awful and kind of narcissistic and almost verging on self-help books. But I think when they're good, they're really it can be fascinating and give you a really interesting perspective that you otherwise wouldn't get. So some of my favourite books have been Andre Agassi's autobiography and Dave Grohl's, and I also loved Anthony Kiedis's from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. But yeah, anything you can recommend that's worth a read would be great. Thank you.
Okay, so that is Edward looking for autobiographies. Who wants to go first?
Well, given that Edward mentioned he enjoyed Dave Grohl's autobiography and the one about the Red Hot Chili Peppers, I thought I was going to go for a music recommendation. And I'm going to recommend Girl in a Band by Kim Gordon from the Sonic Youth, which charts her growing up in hippie California and then her move to New York, where she famously meets Thurston Moore and starts Sonic Youth. And then the very messy breakup of the band, and also her marriage, and then the aftermath. And I thought this was a really touching, raw portrait of what it means, what it's like to be a woman in the music industry.
Nice. Michelle, what are you recommending today?
I've also got a music recommendation as well as a couple of others. My music one is punk legend Viv Albertine's book, Clothes, 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 Music, 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 Boys, 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 which is a story of a young woman growing up in London, going to art school, forming a band, the band breaking up, moving out of London, getting involved in film and acting. But it's just really beautifully written, and she's an amazing character. It's just a really, really good read. Really, really good.
We could sign up to that.
Yeah, welcome to the club, Michelle.
And then if you like sporting autobiographies, this isn't exactly an autobiography because horses can't write or talk, but Seabiscuit by Laura Hillenbrand is fascinating. It's a story of a racehorse and a jockey, but it's also it's set in America and it's set in the world of horse racing before there was really such a thing as health and safety. So it's insanely dangerous what these people are doing. It's like the Wild West, and it's just really well written. So you get the horse and the jockey, but you also get the kind of background and that world of racing. And finally, Educated by Tara Westover is the story of a young woman growing up in a kind of extremist religious prepper family, and the story of how she gets out of it and ends up going to Cambridge University.
Nice, good selection there. Now, I did struggle with this one a little. I'm not musical. I don't listen to a lot of music. My other half, Nick, is trying to educate me as he's a big music fan. But I listen to podcasts, or I often drive in silence without even the radio on. So that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but I quite like the silence. So yes, when Edward was talking about music autobiographies, I was thinking, ooh. And then I was also thinking, I don't read a lot of autobiographies. So I've gone kind of memoir-esque, which I think overlaps, not strictly an autobiography, but I think it still works. And I'm cheating a little bit because I do know Edward, so I think he will like these. So I am recommending Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. So Crying in H Mart is a moving memoir about the complexities of mother-daughter relationships, grieving, forgiveness, the power of food and how it connects us. Really beautiful and also quite insightful, I think. And I think it's a really good memoir. And the other one is And Takeaway, Stories from a Childhood Behind the Counter by Angela Hui. So a kind of wryly funny but also moving memoir of growing up in a Chinese takeaway and a sobering account of racism and otherness in contemporary Britain. I think it's a really, really good insight into one person's experience of what it feels like to be othered within Britain. I think it's really insightful to be able to read that and read Angela's experiences. And I think it was just also really fascinating to see what it was like to grow up with a family running a Chinese takeaway. It was something I didn't really have any experience of. And I found the book funny but moving and really recommend it to everybody.
Hope you like something, Edward.
Enjoy, Edward. Okay, guys, that's just about the end of the show. Next week, we will be taking a week off to recharge our batteries. So we'll see you the week after for our very first author spotlight. We will be looking at Rebecca Mackay and 4 of her novels, so make sure you join us for that. We'll also be chatting about all of the books we've read that week and dishing out some great recommendations to more of our lovely listeners.
As always, links to everything we've been talking about today will be in the show notes. Please feel free to like and subscribe to the pod, tell a friend or leave us a review. It all helps. If you're looking for your next great read and you'd like to be part of the show, send us your recommendation request to ntpramsgate@gmail.com. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at novelthoughts_pod.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.